Most technology companies rely on open source software. But open source software projects are often maintained by a group of people that is not affiliated with any particular company. When an open source project develops too much technical debt, it can become a tragedy of the commons. Who is responsible for maintaining these open source projects? This is the motivation for open source bounties. Companies and individuals who rely on open source create bounties, which are financial incentives for developers to solve problems within the open source project. Kevin Owocki is the creator of Gitcoin, a platform for open source bounties that is mediated by an Ethereum smart contract. Kevin joins the show to discuss his experience building Gitcoin, as well as some of the problems with the blockchain space, such as rampant ICOs. Gitcoin itself is not a cryptocurrency or a token. It is a platform for open source software to be built more efficiently, and Kevin was an awesome guest. You will really enjoy this conversation. Gitcoin is a nice example of a real-world Ethereum use case because it uses Ethereum for escrow. If I post a $25 bounty for someone to fix a bug in my open source project, I can lock up Ether in that smart contract. And when the bug is fixed, the programmer who fixed it will submit a pull request on GitHub, and I'll release the Ether from the smart contract to pay them. It's pretty useful to have a programming abstraction of an escrow contract, and I think this is at least the kinds of things that we will see Ethereum be practically useful for. We would love it if you filled out a listener survey at softwareengineeringdaily.com/survey. This helps us decide what other content to focus on. And please send me an email, jeff@softwaredaily.com. Let me know what you're thinking about the show, if you like it or not. We also have an active Slack community, which you can find at softwareengineeringdaily.com/Slack. You can message me there. There's a bunch of other people hanging out and talking about software engineering. And if you are interested in finding all of our old episodes, you can download the Software Engineering Daily apps for iOS and Android. These have all of our old episodes, and they have a greatest hits feed as well, which is a curated set of the most popular shows. People have really liked this feature of the greatest hits because it's kind of hard to find which shows you want to listen to. And the apps will soon have offline downloads and bookmarking, which are features that people basically need out of a podcast player. So hopefully the podcast player becomes more usable from those. We are running an experiment to find out if Software Engineering Daily listeners are above average engineers. At triplebyte.com/sedaily, you can take a quiz to help us gather data. I took the quiz and it covered a wide range of topics: general programming ability, a little security, a little system design. It was a nice short test to measure how my practical engineering skills have changed since I started this podcast. I will admit, although I've gotten better at talking about software engineering, I have definitely gotten worse at actually writing code and doing software engineering myself. But if you want to check out that quiz yourself and help us gather data, you can take that quiz at triplebyte.com/sedaily. And in a few weeks, we're going to take a look at the results and we're going to find out if SE Daily listeners are above average. And if you're looking for a job, TripleByte is a great place to start your search, fast-tracking you at hundreds of top tech companies. TripleByte takes engineers seriously and does not waste their time. I recommend checking it out at triplebyte.com/sedaily. That's triplebyte.com/sedaily. Thank you, TripleByte, for being a sponsor. Kevin Owocki is the founder of Gitcoin. Kevin, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Jeff, thank you very much for having me.
You worked at some startups before you got into this Ethereum and blockchain space. How would you contrast the traditional world of startups with this emerging world of blockchain developers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As you noted, I have a degree in computer science and about 12 years experience in the startup ecosystem in Boulder, Colorado. I actually I spent 2 years out of school working in corporate America just because I didn't know that startups existed. This is like 2006. This is before Facebook really took off and created the Web 2 revolution. And I just hated corporate America. And I found an opportunity to go through Techstars, which is an accelerator out of Boulder, Colorado. And I was like, holy smokes, this is my golden ticket. And I've pretty much been doing CTO lead engineering stuff ever since. I'd like to say that as a 23-year-old CTO of a startup, 3-person startup, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I've sort of grown along with the Web 2 revolution. Ecosystem has matured, and I think I've matured as an engineering leader alongside that. I think that traditional startups are always kind of focused on finding funding and how can we build relationships with investors and VCs and things of that nature. And that's never really been my forte. I've always just kind of been a product guy and into the programming. So I always felt like on the management teams of startups in the Web 2 revolution that I did, I was on 3 different startups that they were always kind of split between their users and their investors in terms of the management team's focus. And one of the things that I got to say that's really neat about blockchain, which, I think there's a lot of neat things about blockchain that we can get into, is that your users can be your investors in your network. And that creates a focus on the management team, on the users. And sometimes that can make the difference between a failure and success. It's really exciting.
And the mechanism for aligning the users and the developers, in some cases, in modern times, has been the ICO. What do you think of that model?
Oh boy, we're going to really get into the rat's nest now.
Why not?
Yeah, so I will preface this by saying that I do not have a financial background. I am in no way qualified to give financial advice. In no way am I here to even really talk in that capacity. I kind of come as someone who's interested in creating a movement in software to change the way open source software is funded. So that's the perspective that I bring to this whole kind of morass that is the initial coin offering space. I think that, we saw a crowdfunding revolution when Kickstarter came out. I want to say 2011, 2012, around then.
Projects could launch on Kickstarter. Then,
yeah, without going and hitting Sandhill Road for investment. And I think that was crowdfunding. That was an early canary in the coal mine for what we're seeing with the ICO boom. Everyone was really excited about crowdfunding for 6 or 12 months. And then all of a sudden there was all these projects that had raised a ton of money and were able to create a ton of hype and didn't deliver. And crowdfunding on Kickstarter has sort of matured. That ecosystem has matured. I should also mention that Indiegogo is out there. There's a bunch of different crowdfunding platforms, and we've seen those all mature and kind of ebb and flow between hype and delivery. And I'll expect that the ICO boom, which has just kind of taken off in 2017 on the back of the Ethereum network, is going to probably go through a similar maturation cycle as all these projects that raise tens of millions of dollars either change the world or completely fall flat. And some of them are probably going to be really great at managing their capital and ride out the bust. And there's probably going to be some of them that flare out in a spectacular fashion, as is common in every tech boom.
But ultimately, the ICO will be proven to be a useful mechanism for raising capital, just as Kickstarter has. And you hear people talk about how there is just a necessity when there's a new type of technology or a new fundraising mechanism that is fundamentally useful. There is necessarily a time where the pendulum swings too far in the direction of too much money, too much hype. And that is necessary because that's the market testing what are the limits of this mechanism. And so, it's unfortunate that we have just seen probably a number of projects that have raised way too much money off of way too little technology, and it's going to leave a bit of a black eye on the space for a while. But in the long run, it's going to be extremely useful to have this ICO mechanism.
Yeah, and this is where I'll kind of weave in Gitcoin a little bit, because it sort of tells you a little bit about how I view the space. The fact that Gitcoin is not a token. We have not ever done an ICO, and we do not plan to do an ICO. We're just focused on building product that helps developers sustain their work in open source software and solves the incentivization problems with open source software. And I view it's going to take 4 or 5 years for Gitcoin to realize its mission. I am lucky to be funded by a project called Consensus. That is a blockchain venture venture studio out of New York that happens to be founded by Joe Lubin, who is also a founder of the Ethereum project and just kind of has a long view on all of this space and the disruption that it's going to create. So I think that my view is sort of informed by ignoring all the hype with the ICOs and just focus on building a product that users love, which I think has been a recipe for success as far as I can remember in my career in technology.
And yeah, I think it sounds like a great pairing, the Consensus and Gitcoin pairing. By the way, I should mention Consensus is a sponsor of the show, but I wanted to do this interview anyway, so partially because I'm a Gitcoin user. That's one of the reasons I want to have you on, is because it's interesting that you did not do an ICO, even though Gitcoin resembles the kind of project where an ICO might actually make some sense, but it's clear you made an autonomous decision to kind of do a more conventional route. Well, I guess it's not necessarily conventional because you're going under the auspices of a venture studio. So why did you decide not to do an ICO? I guess to make it a little bit more concrete for people who are trying to understand the ICO space.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad you asked that question, because I don't think I've been on a few podcasts and I don't think that I've even been asked that question directly. So first off, there's like an ethical thing there, where is it ethical for a project to raise tens of millions of dollars before there's product market fit? And I'll leave the listener to decide in their own minds how they splice and dice that. In my mind, maybe if the founders have a track record, maybe if they're playing in a space where there's a ton of upside, maybe if there's momentum that is associated with customer contracts but no product.
Well, let's see. What are the historical examples? We've got Color, Theranos. What else is there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of like a bias in the media that where the most like emotionally impactful ones are the ones that get reported. So
that's true.
But yeah, so I mean, I actually don't even know the answer to the question. But like when I'm trying to make a decision with incomplete information in the startup in Gitcoin, I think a lot about how Ethereum. So my view of blockchain is that it's the TCP/IP of money. So TCP/IP is just this simple protocol that allows computers to send information from one computer to another without an intermediary. And it completely changed our lives with respect to the internet and how it changed our media and, what Napster did to record companies. I think blockchain could do to banks and insurance companies, because blockchain is the TCP/IP of money. It's a fundamental protocol that allows the sending of value or money from one computer to another without a centralized intermediary. So take all the all the stuff that's happened to the world because of the internet in the last 20 years and project that forward. If the financial system, which is arguably an order of magnitude more influential in our politics and our society, was completely revolutionized by open source money. In that view, if you have that large of a view, I think taking the first business model that's on the table for a project with as much potential as Gitcoin would be pretty silly, because, there's all these projects who have created this white paper and they have this vision of the world and how it's going to exist in 4 years, and they have these token economics, and they're all tied to that vision after they've done an ICO. They have to deliver it because they put it in their white paper. And I just think that the world is evolving so fast and rapidly that there's going to be more killer applications on the Ethereum blockchain, and that I'm going to want to have a more informed opinion and the opinion of the community before deciding if and when to build a business model into Gitcoin.
Well, that's a very strategic approach. You are maintaining optionality in a time of intense market volatility. It's the right way to do it, in my book. It's funny because I'm watching this space as a journalist, basically, or a reporter, a podcast, or whatever this job is. And I completely agree with you at this point after doing enough interviews. And by the way, there are people in the audience who are so sick of these blockchain episodes I've done. I've done like 20 or 25 in a row or something like that at this point. But the reason is because of what you said. Like, we're about to see the financial system like totally just get the table turned on it. And it's going to be really entertaining. And I'm trying to like lay a foundation for that. And at the same time, I'm seeing that and I'm like, I'm in the podcasting business. Like, I kind of want to get back into engineering because there's a lot of opportunity here. And I guess you were kind of in that mindset too, because around, I think, 2015, Ethereum came out. As far as I know, you were not a blockchain aficionado until around that time, and probably you started seeing Ethereum. You're like, whoa, this is cool. This is the real deal. and then you meandered around for a bit and looked for something to work on. Is that right?
Yeah, that's more or less correct. And I just wanted to share a funny anecdote before I answer your question. So I popped in the SE Daily Slack yesterday just to say hi to you. And like the first message I saw in the general channel was like, it's been 2 weeks talking about cryptocurrency. When's it going to stop? And there's like a few emojis that are thumbs upping it. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess it's good that Gitcoin's not a cryptocurrency; it's a blockchain project. But I'm not sure that the audience is going to even listen if the project's called Gitcoin. So fatigue is hitting people, and you got to filter out the noise. And hopefully, funding open source is a mission that is your audience cares about enough that all the mumbo jumbo about blockchain is kind of a means to that end. Anyway, so sorry, your question was I meandered around in the space before starting Gitcoin?
Yes, and when you were meandering around, did you feel this sense of, oh, I got to find something to work on? I know that there's excitement in this space, but I don't know exactly how to capitalize on it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if capitalize is the right word. I mean, I think that, I think
not capitalize, but it's because we're all developers. We're all looking for that sense of internal traction where you find that project where it's like, yes, this is it. I can iterate on this. And that is in contrast to the maybe you're at a job you don't necessarily like and you're like trying to find something to work on, and like we all know that feeling where you don't have that internal sense of traction.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. So like I started this project in 2015. I remember I bought 10,000 Ethereum in 2015 off of Poloniex, and I like to say that I was smart enough to buy, but not smart enough to hold, because when it went up like 30%, I was like, sweet, I just made a couple $1,000. I am going to go buy a mountain bike with this money. And it's just so funny in hindsight, when you look after you found that internal traction and you look backwards on the decisions that you made when you didn't have the benefit of hindsight. It's funny how that works. So yeah, that was my more sort of like financial experimentation in the space. The technical experimentation was I built a machine learning cryptocurrency trading robot called PyTrader, and I open sourced it and quickly got like 1.3K stars on GitHub, built a community there, and quickly got burnt out and gave up on that project. I built This was
a trading bot for cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, it just basically took a bunch of classifiers in the Python sklearn libraries and tried to classify market data into buy, sell, hold decisions. I think that how it performed was I had one Bitcoin, and I was able to make 3 Bitcoin in profit, but I forgot to account for fees. So I actually lost 0.1 Bitcoin. And, it's just like rookie mistake kind of stuff and I also realized that I don't really care about financial engineering when I was doing that project. So I moved on to another project called AdBlock to Bitcoin. This is all nights and weekends, by the way. Still employed full-time in the tech scene in Colorado at my friend's company, and built this project called AdBlock to Bitcoin, which basically took ad-blocked ad space and help publishers recover lost revenue from the ad-blocked ad space by putting a Bitcoin QR code with a donation solicitation in that ad space. So that was a neat project, and Wired wrote about it, which was kind of like a jolt to the ego, which was pretty cool, but no one ever used it. So that project fizzled. And since then, all that I've done in the space has been in the Ethereum space. So I'm a community organizer in Boulder, Colorado. I run the Ethereum Boulder Meetup and also the Boulder Blockchain Meetup, which has been a great way of getting to know people in the space, but is by all means kind of a less technical approach to getting into the space. And then the last project that I built before I started Gitcoin was called You've Got ETH. It was kind of think of it like it was a playoff of You've Got Mail from the 90s. And the idea was to make it as easy to send Ethereum to someone as it is to send an email. And built that at a hackathon out in LA called the Dapathon, and won the community prize, which was a pretty big honor, and kind of have just found traction in the Ethereum space ever since. But I'd like to think that Gitcoin is informed by all that graveyard of projects that I had before Gitcoin was started.
Users have come to expect real time. They crave alerts that their payment is received. They crave little cars zooming around on the map. They crave locking their doors at home when they're not at home. There's no need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to making your app real time. PubNub makes it simple, enabling you to build immersive and interactive experiences on the web, on mobile phones, embedded into hardware, and any other device connected to the internet. With powerful APIs and a robust global infrastructure, you can stream geolocation data, you can send chat messages, you can turn on sprinklers, or you can rock your baby's crib when they start crying. PubNub literally powers IoT cribs. 70 SDKs for web, mobile, IoT, and more means that you can start streaming data in real time without a ton of compatibility headaches. And no need to build your own SDKs from scratch. And lastly, PubNub includes a ton of other real-time features beyond real-time messaging, like presence for online or offline detection, and access manager to thwart trolls and hackers. Go to pubnub.com/sedaily to get started. They offer a generous sandbox tier that's free forever until your app takes off, that is. pubnub.com/sedaily, that's pubnub.com/sedaily. Thank you, PubNub, for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. What you said about the financial engineering experiment, like trying out, like, hey, maybe I'm a trader person. I had a similar foray. My first job out of college was at a trading place in Chicago, and on the one hand, it's really exciting and exhilarating to just see those numbers go up and down, and kind of like, you're just correcting over time. It's like you're playing a game and you're programming a computer to play a game a little bit more intelligently over time. And that part of it is cool. What's less cool is, you realize you're not really building a product. It's like you're building a character in a fighting game or something like that. And it's not as exciting as all the opportunities that you could have in computer science. But I think, there are a lot of people that are drawn to the trading and the speculation side of it, and nothing wrong with that. But I think for those people, okay, there's kind of an obvious route to doing financial engineering type of stuff in this space. You've got money and volatility, and you just get involved and start figuring it out, and you'll make some money. For the people who are building stuff, it feels early still, and I think that's what makes your approach to Gitcoin intelligent. And I think we should get into that. So, like, basically, what Gitcoin is, you have issues on your GitHub repo. You've got your open source project, and you've got issues that you've created, and you want to create bounties for those issues. And if you want to make a bounty for it, you decide on how much money you want to pay somebody if they're going to be kind of a mercenary and solve the problem in your open source project. Or maybe there's somebody that's already involved in the open source community, and they just decide to pick it up to make a few extra bucks. And the bounty is enforced. It's codified within an Ethereum smart contract. And so when the person finishes the bounty, when they finish that work, they are awarded the money that is locked up in the Ethereum smart contract. Did I get it right? Is that an articulation?
Yeah, that's exactly what it does.
Okay. So my first question, why is Ethereum useful for this? Why couldn't you just use Stripe, for example, and set up an escrow account through Stripe?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's one of the. So I mean, right now we're sort of in a space where we're selling to Ethereum developers, and I will note that everything's based off of the Ethereum toolset, and we're not really ready to venture out into the rest of the wild world of open source yet. So basically, Ethereum is a worldwide, near instant blockchain-based payment network, and what that means is that can send money worldwide almost instantly for very, very cheap. So, if you were to put up an issue, you not only have a pool of developers in the United States that you can work with, but worldwide, which I think is, for a globalized world, that's pretty important. I think that not having to have the overhead of being an intermediary is important for Gitcoin. So if you look at Upwork's terms of service, then they basically have an LLC called Upwork Escrow, which basically holds the money in between the freelancer and the person who's hired them until it's paid out. And because on Gitcoin, the money is locked on the blockchain. I never have access to that money. So no one ever has to worry about, about my intentions or my stewardship of that money because it's all just on the blockchain. And then so the third answer is that we're really interested in tokenization and using that as a means of allowing people to align incentives between people in their open source communities. So, we talked a little bit about ICOs earlier in the podcast, but basically tokenization is just basically taking shares of your software licenses or of your project or whatever has value to your project and putting it in a token standard called ERC20. ERC20 is just the standard for distributing tokens on Ethereum. And because there's that standard, Gitcoin can be interoperable with any token that adheres to that standard. And what that means is that if in 6 months you decide that there should be an SE daily token that has whatever use case you decide, then you could stake those tokens for contributors to contribute to SE daily. So you're kind of like taking a step towards this distributed organization in which you pay out shares of your software licenses as currency for your project. And that wouldn't be possible at all with any legacy financial product. And those three reasons in combination are why we chose to base the project on Ethereum and on the blockchain. And I think that the fact that Ethereum has 30x the active devs of the next most active smart contract platform in blockchain meant that it was just a no-brainer to build it on Ethereum once we had decided to build it in blockchain.
Those are some super smart reasons. So the first one you mentioned is international payments. Stripe may not be available in Vietnam. I don't know if it is, but I mean, there's probably some area of the world where it's not accessible, whereas Ethereum is a global payment system. The second issue you mentioned is probably not good for, if you just think of it from the point of view of building a company, you don't want to have to set up a separate escrow service in order to have your company work. And this is one of the things that's amazing about Ethereum that the naysayers may still not understand. This is a way that you can have financial programming constructs for your application. Okay, you want an escrow account? Create it in JavaScript. You don't have to set up an escrow company to handle that. So you mentioned that this is a programmable escrow, and an escrow is kind of a complex financial product. It's simple in what it does, but if you think about the kind of work that you would have had to do to implement an escrow service, I don't know, just 2 or 3 years ago, it's a lot more work, probably a lot more overhead.
Yeah, I don't know if I would implement it in JavaScript, but
Web3, whatever. I mean, maybe there's, I'm just envisioning somebody has a smart contract that provides you with escrow services and you access it through Web3 or something like that.
Yeah, no, I was mostly starting to make a joke because anyone in the Gitcoin community knows that I love programming in Python. And as soon as I start writing JavaScript, I end up in callback hell. But it's just because I'm not a good JavaScript programmer. But there is an interesting subpoint here, which is that when you make the jump from web development to Solidity and Web3 programming, you're working in an immutable smart contract. Once it's deployed to the blockchain, your code cannot be changed. So it's not like, continuous improvement deployment where you can make changes after you've deployed it. Like once you've deployed it, it's out there because the blockchain is an immutable data structure. But the second, more larger point is that when I'm working with web development, there's always a back out path for me if I create a bug. Whereas these smart contracts in the Ethereum space can be holding tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes even millions of dollars. So bugs can be super, super costly in the blockchain space. So, you can create a JavaScript or a Solidity script for your escrow service, but please have it security audited and make sure that there is no attack surface in your code, because if not, you're going to have a bad time.
Okay. So we've kind of careened into the discussion of this project. When did you start thinking about these ideas, the idea of attaching bounties to Git issues? Oh, and by the way, okay, I didn't explain re-explain the third issue you gave, the third reason you gave, which was very important, which is the fact that eventually people can use Gitcoin to facilitate payment of tokens for issues. And what I think is great about this, the show that's actually airing today is about Status, which is a company that raised $100 million for an Ethereum mobile client. And they have a 2-year vesting schedule for their tokens. And I was like, that is a little dangerous because you're giving yourself an out to exit the company in 2 years. But, what he said to me is like, first of all, I'm married to this project. I'm really excited about it. And like, okay, that's great. But, show me on paper that's the case, that you're married to the project. Maybe you can't do that. But, what he did say is in the long run, he wants to have the community maintain the project. And he's going to do that through incentivizing the token holders with status tokens. But, here is a way where you could actually you could fund mercenaries as well. You could fund the token holders as well as funding the mercenaries out there who may want the status token to be paid for status. So hopefully that makes sense to people, since now we've both explained the thrusts of Gitcoin and the long-term vision of it. But yeah, when did you start thinking about this? When did you start thinking about the importance of attaching bounties to Git issues? And why is that fundamental to your vision of the future of software development?
Yeah. So I mean, if we talked about that kind of graveyard of projects side projects that I started and let die in 2015 and 2016, and how discovered that financial engineering did not motivate me at all. And so, what's the opposite of like a competitive race to the bottom kind of like financial engineering project? Well, it's a project that's mission driven. So one thing I've discovered about myself is that starting with a mission, something I'd like to see in the world that I think is a good place to start. And one of the things that I think that has been most influential in my career and the entire generation of software engineers that I've come up with is open source software. Open source software is like manna from the heavens because it's powered all of our careers. I mean, Postgres, Apache, WordPress, these are just, I could rattle off 100, we could fill up the rest of the podcast with open source projects that have just been really, really good for the world. And I think that, we shouldn't take that for granted. I think if I was in my parents' generation, I would have come up building things on the Microsoft stack and everything would have been closed source. And I would have had to email my buddy at Microsoft instead of looking on Stack Overflow or on GitHub when I had a problem with the software. So open source has hopefully I've established that it's been a good thing in the world. But there's this weird problem with incentivization mechanics in open source where it's creating tens of billions of dollars in economic value, but the expected value is free. And somewhere in between those two numbers, software developers make between $20 and $250 an hour, depending on your niche and your geographic location and your seniority and all that kind of stuff. So what the problem that we set out to solve with Gitcoin is that there aren't a lot of great sustainability options for open source software contributions. I mean, it's basically corporate sponsorship if you really get down to it and doing it professionally, I think. But the problem with corporate sponsorship is that it requires a lot of scale and administrative overhead. And so I was kind of thinking about this problem and realized that, well, if the future of the world's financial system, if you accept the premise of that the future of the world's financial system is based off of blockchain, and that blockchain allows you to unbundle the business models of legacy infrastructure, well, what's the combination of the two ideas? And the hope is that blockchain is the spark that allows us to unbundle the corporate sponsorship of open source down to small and medium-sized repos so that guys like me and you can make money for our software development, for the work that we're doing that's good for the world in open source. And Bounties is just the first tool in our toolbox that we're launching that's aligned with that mission. But I think that there's no higher calling that I can think of in my life at this time, other than family and community, that I can contribute to the world besides growing open source software and pushing open source software forward. So that's kind of the why behind the project.
And there are bounties in software development, but as you said, that it takes place through corporate sponsorship, and it's not an open market for bounties. And so you think of an example like, what was it, SSL? Was it SSL, the open source SSL library, where there were two people maintaining it, and then was it Heartbleed? The Heartbleed issue happened basically because it's two people maintaining this horrendous code base for years and years and years and years that the entire internet depends on, and then the Heartbleed bug is discovered, and it's a hair on fire moment. And if you would have had Gitcoin there, perhaps on an earlier basis, the two people that were working on OpenSSL could have gone to Google and said, "Hey, can you guys give us like $5 million that we can just allocate to Gitcoin issues and we can do it as we please. You could just imagine this loss in market friction that could result from the creation of Gitcoin.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that, one of the things that's really been powerful for us has been security bounties. When we launched, we just basically said, we're staking for Ethereum. If you can find any bugs, then if they're high in the OWASP model, then we'll pay you out a lot. And if they're low in the OWASP severity, then we'll pay it out a little. And so, you could imagine a situation in which Google and Yahoo and all these other players that spent probably hundreds of thousands of dollars patching their system because of these bugs in the hair on fire moment, had just instead funded some security bounties on Gitcoin for the SSL project, then we could have made the internet more secure and avoided this whole kerfuffle with Heartbleed. So, I think that, there is an opportunity there if people have enough foresight to help grow open source.
People have talked about gig economy applications on the blockchain. The Uber or the Airbnb of blockchain applications. Gitcoin seems like the first one to gain actual traction. Do you think there's going to be more of these? Like, how do you see the gig economy on the blockchain evolving?
I think the world's at large right now is trying to figure out what a 21st century jobs program looks like. And, the gig economy is sort of a loaded term because I think that in some places it's been a really powerful way for people to earn their living, but it's also in other places kind of seen as pretty predatory. And, I've been thankful enough to be a software engineer, or I'm thankful enough to be a software engineer who has never sort of been short on cash and had, been in a position where I need to sign up for Uber. So I think that I'm not in a place where I've really experienced it and sort of know all the trends. But I think that we're interested in, for now, providing tools that allow developers to augment their income. And, once we get enough confidence in the economy around Gitcoin that's sufficient that people are making enough money to start supporting themselves off of Gitcoin, then I think, that will be a major milestone that we've reached. I think that a future in which software developers, it's as easy for software developers to find work as it is for an Uber driver today, that's a potentially powerful vision of the future, but it's not without downside, as I mentioned, from the legacy financial infrastructure's gig economy. And, I would like to make sure that we create an environment in which software developers have leverage over their life circumstances and are well connected in a community that's going to support them. And that is my vision for the future of knowledge work on the blockchain. But I would be remiss to say that I know what other blockchain-based jobs projects are thinking. I think that we're sort of in a niche in blockchain right now, and 99.9% of the hot air in the media is covered by price swings and volatility and technical analysis and all that crap. And hopefully people start to see the larger picture that it's about people and their lifestyles and their circumstances more so than trading and speculation and Wall Street style stuff. And, hopefully we as a community will rally around a positive vision of the future of the gig economy, but I haven't seen it yet. I think it's more to come.
Azure Container Service simplifies the deployment, management, and operations of Kubernetes. Eliminate the complicated planning and deployment of fully orchestrated, containerized applications with Kubernetes. You can quickly provision clusters to be up and running in no time, while simplifying your monitoring and cluster management through auto upgrades and a built-in operations console. Avoid being locked into any one vendor or resource. You can continue to work with the tools that you already know, such as Helm, and move applications to any Kubernetes deployment. Integrate with your choice of container registry, including Azure Container Registry. Also, quickly and efficiently scale to maximize your resource utilization without having to take your applications offline. Isolate your application from infrastructure failures and transparently scale the underlying infrastructure to meet growing demands, all while increasing the security, reliability, and availability of critical business workloads with Azure. To learn more about Azure Container Service and other Azure services, as well as receive a free ebook by Brendan Burns, go to aka.ms/sedaily. Brendan Burns is the creator of Kubernetes, and his ebook is about some of the distributed systems design lessons that he has learned building Kubernetes. That ebook is available at aka.ms/sedaily. I guess a salient difference between the fevered dreams of decentralization lovers about the decentralized Uber or the decentralized name your gig economy application, between that and Gitcoin is the decentralization fever dream is to have the entire database and the reputation system and everything be decentralized. Whereas the Gitcoin model is more like, well, for the most part, the gig economy system remains in a centralized database running in a Django application or whatever, and you're using Ethereum for a small fraction of your application. How far are we from people having the ability to have that decentralized reputation system and all that? Because that's what really excites people like the first Carl Flourish, who maybe an Ethereum guy, but the first conversation I had with him was really about this decentralized Uber, and he was so excited about it. And we are far from that vision, though.
So first off, I would just want to take a step back and appreciate the new vocabulary phrase that I'm going to steal from you, which is decentralization fever dream. Because I think that we've all been in a room where multiple people are in the same fever dream. So, I think one big difference between, the name your gig economy on Ethereum or on blockchain projects in Gitcoin is that Gitcoin's actually launched.
Exactly.
Made a purposeful decision not to boil the ocean and to
which by the way is even a step above many of these ICOs. These ICOs that have raised $25-100 million, they haven't even launched yet. It's insane.
Yeah, I think
no judgment. No hashtag no judgment.
Yeah, I'm judging hard over here. I think that, we've seen all these projects funded, and hopefully in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see some of them launch and actually gain real market traction. And I think what's really exciting for me is about a decentralized gig economy system is that in Uber, for example, or an Uber-like product, if you're a manager at Uber, you're always making decisions about, do I optimize for what's good for my investors and for my market share, or do I optimize for what's good for my users, meaning the riders and the car drivers? And what's really exciting about this decentralized fever dream about a decentralized Uber is that the users of the network in decentralized application can actually be the investors in the system if you design your token in that way. And I think that that's really, really powerful to have all of members of an application to have their incentives aligned. And not to belabor this point too much, but we're recording this podcast in the middle of March 2018, and there has just been a ton of stuff in the news about Facebook leaking the data of their users to all sorts of different places. I think the most recent one is this Cambridge Analytica thing where 50 million people's information was used in order to do something which sounds like it might have been nefarious or not with the election. And I just think that, the interesting example about Facebook is that they have a chokehold over everyone's social graph. So basically, if you're not happy with Facebook, then you can either quit and throw away that sunken cost of the social graph that you built up there, or you can stay, which is a pretty binary choice. But in this Web3 world, we're going to have this open data layer where you have sovereignty over your data and over your reputation. And if you don't like the way the social network that you're dealing with, if you don't like their font color or you don't like anything about them, then you can just move to a competitor and you can bring your data with you. And I think that creates a fundamentally different relationship between the consumer and the investors in the network than one that we've seen before. And I'm very excited to see some of these projects launch and hopefully have their users' best interests at heart.
Indeed. When I get into conversations with people about this who are anti-Facebook, I make the classic programmer techno-optimist defense, which is, you get these awesome free services and you pay for them in advertising that is served to you. And would you really want to give up those free services just so that you don't have ad targeting? And I always present that, but the truth is that that's a false dichotomy, because there is a wider range of options that we can explore for delivering social network-like facilities, Google-like facilities to people, where it's not necessarily, you either pay for it, or you opt out, or you have to opt into surveillance. There is a wider range of interesting options that we could explore. Maybe the richest people in the network pay for everybody else, something like that. You could totally imagine Ethereum billionaires being charitable in that regard,
Yeah, I mean,
like bootstrapping a social network by paying for the people who can't afford it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was all this excitement when Facebook launched, and I was in my early 20s, and I think I was excited at that time that I could just look up anyone, and if I had a crush on a girl, I could check her out and see what she's into, which at the time no one admitted they were doing, but I think a lot of people were doing. But 10 years in, it seems like, holy smokes, we gave up all of our personal data to the system, and now all we're getting is pictures of our Facebook, our high school friends' Facebook pictures of their babies. And I just think that, in hindsight, it was wait, we gave up some really powerful information about ourselves in exchange for this utility. And to your point, the decision to quit or not quit is very binary. And, hopefully we can do better as a technology sector and provide a more gradient array of options to users.
Okay, so we're kind of careening close to the end of our time now, but we haven't talked about Gitcoin as much as I would like. I'm very curious about the market dynamics of Gitcoin. So when somebody posts an issue, for example, I want my font color to be changed to a nicer shade of blue, or implement continuous integration on my project. Those are both issues that you could see that somebody could post on GitHub, and they could create Gitcoin issues associated with that. They would have to decide how much money to pay, how much money they're going to lock up in the smart contract that's going to be associated with that. Although those two issues have a wide gulf in terms of their complexity. So you talk about changing the color on a web page. That's a very discrete and well-defined task that somebody could do. And so maybe it's easier to figure out a price for that one. But then you have these tasks like implement continuous integration. That's a bit of a more complex task. There's more subjectivity to it, and yet you still have to attach a price to it. So I just use that as an example of the pricing dynamics seem very difficult to figure out. So what kinds of things are you seeing on the platform in terms of how people are pricing and what people are willing to actually do the work for those bounties on?
Yeah, good question. So, we've seen a few hundred bounties successfully go through the platform now. And so I think we have a nice little data set to analyze with respect to pricing dynamics and several other market dynamics. So, I guess the question for you when you're posting a bounty, I think you kind of took us through your thought process. Is this a good thing for a bounty? If it's more on the discrete side, then it's a good thing for a bounty. If it's hard to specify, then maybe it's not so good for some random internet stranger to do. And it's more something that you should iterate through. And does it require privileged knowledge to your systems? So, that example that you gave, setting up CI would require very least SSH access to some sort of system or API keys and things of that nature. So we've seen a lot more successful bounties for easy to specify tasks that don't require privileged knowledge. And, you basically have to kind of do a gut check for how much you want to pay for something to get done. And I think a lot of things factor into that decision. We're looking to build a pricing engine to automate some of this, but basically how fast do you want it done? Are you looking for someone who's a senior level person? Are you looking to possibly hire someone and this is a try before you buy kind of situation? Or are you just kind of looking for someone who's very junior, is looking to learn new skills and build a reputation, and so you're willing to pay on the lower side of the market value for a software engineer's time. So I think that there's entire books that have been written on complexity estimates in software engineering, and I think with 5 minutes left in our podcast, it'd be impossible to traverse that entire terrain. But I think it would suffice to say that we're looking to add a feature to figure out the pricing mechanics when posting to Gitcoin sometime in the next quarter.
What are the other things you're focused on? What are you working on in the Gitcoin project? What is the sub projects that are underway?
Yeah, as I sort of alluded to earlier in the podcast, Gitcoin's mission is to grow open source software, and I am under no illusions that Bounties is the only tool that should be in our toolbox. I think there's that quote that we all learn in Computer Science 201 that if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. And I think that you will see a toolbox coming out of Gitcoin that allows you to play with incentivization mechanics in a lot of different ways with open source software and blockchain. So if you go to gitcoin.co/tools, you can see some of those, but just to traverse that a little bit. So we've got Bounties, we've got tips, which is just a way of saying, hey, here's 0.1 Ethereum. Thanks, you did a great job. We've got dev grants, which we are launching soon and are pretty excited about. We are building a feature that will facilitate a mentorship economy. So either out of the good of your heart or in exchange for some Ethereum, you can mentor a junior developer in whatever you're good at. And we will also soon be hosting a repository of off-chain bounties. So with the use case of bounties that we've talked about so far, it's all been ones that have Ethereum staked in a smart contract. But, with the reality of the ecosystem in the Ethereum space right now is that things are kind of fractured, and we can't expect that everyone who is providing great work to a community in open source software is going to use our bounty standard. We hope that that'll change in the future. But in the meantime, we have a repository of bounties from across the web, whether they're Ethereum based or Bitcoin based or even plain old USD based. And we've just basically hosting that as a service for our users so that Gitcoin can be a one-stop shop for them to figure out where they can make money and meet people in open source software. So I think I told you, I probably told you about 4 or 5 of the tools that are going to be in our toolbox, but we've got about 30 on our roadmap. And we're just going to kind of iterate through them, and we're going to double down on the ones that work, and we're going to kill the ones that don't. And hopefully by this time next year, we will have a functioning set of at least a dozen or half a dozen tools that software developers will be able to use to grow their skills and hopefully make a living.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, I could even envision teams eventually, coming up on Gitcoin and building a reputation, and then maybe you can contract an entire team to build you a product MVP or something. But that's getting probably into the future, and that's getting into the fuzzy product development that is less good for Gitcoin today. But I mean, I'm sure I could see that being a product.
I mean, we're very focused on providing the building blocks so that we can create a bottoms up set of tools that can realize that vision. Whereas I think a lot of these ICO projects, like future of work things, are kind of like starting with what the future is going to look like and trying to build it all kind of from a more top down standpoint. So, we'll see which approach is successful and yields results for the community.
Okay. So I'm interviewing all these people about Ethereum and whatnot, and I'm kind of trying to figure out, is there a tipping point to where Ethereum becomes something that the average developer is using or that the average person in the world is using? Like, I don't know if it's adoption of the currency or if it's a question of scalability of the blockchain. That doesn't seem to be it. It doesn't seem to be scalability. I mean, is it the fact that private keys are still really hard to maintain and juggle, and so you have a lot of people who hear about Ethereum or Bitcoin, but they still don't really get involved because they're afraid of the public key infrastructure? But then even those people could be using Coinbase, but then there's not really anything to do with that cryptocurrency other than speculate on it. And maybe there's no silver bullet answer here, and this is just like a slow process of adoption and periodic spurts and gradual progress. But do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what are the things that I should be watching out for that are going to indicate that something has triggered and this stuff is becoming mainstream, and not just mainstream in a speculative sense, but mainstream in okay, I can build apps on this and I can build businesses and real Web3 stuff on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm glad that you framed it in let's put all the speculation stuff aside, because, I think that we're sort of reaching saturation of the get rich quick with blockchain kind of stuff. And I hope that people will focus on building and that side of the space as opposed to the more Wall Streety side of the space. So, and I think that for me, it comes down to drivers and barriers, right? So right now people are getting into this space and they're confronted with all of these questions and problems, as you noted, about key management and how do I back up my keys and how do I keep my wallet safe. And so the barriers are quite high, but the drivers are quite high too, because people are thinking, they read these news articles about how they can become millionaires overnight with the blockchain. And they're like, oh, well, maybe it's worth overcoming these barriers. So what I would really like to see so that we can move out of the speculative nature of blockchain is that the barriers come down. And that means that everyday consumers who don't have that high drive to speculate and basically just want to live their lives can use Ethereum. And I think that that'll be the tipping point in which Ethereum is everywhere. So I think there's basically two scenarios in which Ethereum takes over the world. And the first is that Ethereum becomes a Web3 web browser. So basically everyone manages their own wallets. They have their own private keys, and they can sign transactions within their web browser and wherever else they want associated with whatever use case associated with value transfer in this new blockchain ecosystem, and the users control their keys. So I think that that's scenario one with blockchain. And the second scenario, which I think is more of like a failure path from the first scenario for the space, is that Ethereum becomes Linux. So what I mean by that is that everyone in the world uses Linux, whether or not they know it or not. Whenever you hit a website, well, it depends on what website, but you're probably hitting some flavor of Red Hat or Ubuntu or whatever, and you just don't know it because it's all abstracted away from you. And I think that the analog there with Ethereum is that you won't manage your own wallet, and you won't even know that it's blockchain in the back, but you know that there's all these new benefits and everything all of a sudden is cheaper and the incentives are more aligned for you. Also, there's data portability, but you just never have to learn about key management or anything like that. So I think that those are like basically the two scenarios in which Ethereum is everywhere, and they're slightly different in terms of how aware the consumer is of them. But I think that like the base case is that the bottom line is that they're still powered by Ethereum, so it's still powering the internet of money in both of those cases.
All right. Well, I really like that explanation. Thanks for coming on the show, Kevin. It's been great talking.
Jeff, it's been a pleasure to be on the show. And if your listeners wouldn't mind checking out gitcoin.co and popping into our Slack community with any feedback or thoughts on the product, we'd be happy to hear from them. Thank you very much for having me on the show, Jeff.
Wonderful. It's been great. Okay. Thanks, Kevin. You're a successful developer, and you couldn't have gotten to where you are without help in your education and career. Maybe you're thinking about ways to give back in the community where you live. The TEALS program is looking for engineers from across the country to volunteer to teach computer science in high schools. Work with a computer science teacher in the classroom to bring development concepts to life through teamwork and determination. Pay your success forward by volunteering with high school students in your area by encouraging them on the computer science path. You can make a difference. If you'd like to learn more about the Microsoft TEALS program or submit your volunteer application, go to tealsk12.org/sedaily. That's tealsk12.org/sedaily. Thank you to the TEALS program for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily.
Wow.